What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue here with my 2024 college football schedule preview and projected record series. Up next are the Alabama Crimson Tide, of course, the team that went to the college football playoff last season in 2023. Before we preview their schedule for 2024 and give them an early projected record based on how tough their schedule is, let's take a look at what this Alabama team did in 2023. Here were my projections and predictions last year for the Alabama Crimson Tide. As you see, my overall projection for them last year was 11-1, and then my prediction for this Alabama team was also 11-1, and that's exactly what they did. So I got their record pretty much right from last year in 2023, as again, we're basing this off of the regular season. But if you count the SEC championship and the playoff semifinal loss, this team actually went like 12-2 overall in 2023. But again, this Alabama team finished with a record of 11-1 last season in 2023. Here was that schedule last year for the Alabama Crimson Tide. You see they played Middle Tennessee, USF in the non-conference, and also Texas in the non-conference, and then also played Chattanooga. So they didn't have a tough non-conference schedule last year, but they did play, of course, Texas out of the Power 5 and everything. They ended up losing that game. That was, of course, the only loss that they had last year at home. But after that loss to Texas, Alabama, of course, won the rest of their games, and this team, of course, went to the SEC championship and won it all. And they did have some tough road games on the schedule last year with Texas A&M and Auburn. Of course, that Auburn game was a really classic game there between those two teams. So Alabama, again, going 11-1 last year. Obviously, it's a new era for Alabama, of course, with the new head coach and everything, but not for the program, just for the new head coach. Of course, Kalen DeBoer taking over for the retiring Nick Saban. Let's now look ahead to 2024. And here is that schedule for the Alabama Crimson Tide in 2024. Before we go game by game and preview each and every single individual game on this schedule, let's take a look at who Alabama plays in the non-conference. Remember, no divisions in the SEC, of course. They'll play Western Kentucky, South Florida in a rematch from last year. Then it's on the road at Wisconsin here, and then, of course, Mercer here at home. So 3 out of the 4 games here on this non-conference schedule for the Crimson Tide are, a little bit tough. The 3 out of the 4 games are not that tough. Wisconsin here on the road makes the non-conference schedule a little bit tougher, but I think it's a pretty favorable non-conference schedule if you're an Alabama fan. Again, playing on the road at Wisconsin will be a tough one there in the non-conference. Wisconsin hasn't been really that good in the last 2 years. They're kind of, trying to, find that way, to really get back to where they need to be as a program in the Big Ten. So I think this will be a tough one here, but maybe Alabama will be a slight favorite on the road here, depending on what happens, of course, with this projection. But let's go back to the schedule now for Alabama in 2024. And now let's go game by game here and preview each and every single game here on this schedule. So Alabama will kick things off here with Western Kentucky, and then they'll play South Florida here. You got 2 cupcake games to kick off the season for Alabama on August 31st and September the 7th. Of course, they play South Florida, a rematch from last year. The game was pretty close last year between these two teams. I think Alabama will be ready for South Florida this time, though. Playing at home gives them that confidence to get revenge on South Florida. Not for the revenge of the game last year, just for revenge of not playing really good last year against South Florida. So I think Alabama playing at home will be ready for this one. And then there's that game on the road at Wisconsin here on September the 14th. Very tough place to play. It's going to be a very tough non-conference game, especially with a first-year head coach in Kalen DeBoer. But Alabama, probably is the more talented team going into this game. And then they get a bye week after this Wisconsin game rather early here in the month of September. And then they open up SEC play here with that game against Georgia here on September 28th. Of course, this is a rematch here from last year's SEC championship game. Alabama beat them by 3, so Georgia's out for revenge in this game. The good news is that Alabama gets this game at home, and then they play Vanderbilt here on the road on October 5th to open things up here in October. And then it's South Carolina here on October the 12th at home. Then they play on the road here at Tennessee on October 19th. Very tough place to play here at Knoxville and Neyland Stadium. The last time Alabama came to Knoxville, they did lose to Tennessee by 3. That snapped a 15-game winning streak for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Then they'll play Missouri here at home on October 26th. Kind of like a trap game for Alabama. It seems like Missouri's got their program heading in the right direction with Eli Drinkwitz. This is a team that won 11 games last year. And then they get a bye week after that Missouri game before playing on the road at LSU. I mean, LSU, of course, obviously going to be a very tough place to play as well. This game will be, of course, on November 9th. And then they play Mercer after that on November 16th. And then they play on the road here at Oklahoma, another very tough place to play here on the road. Of course, Oklahoma will be one of those newcomers in the SEC. And then they close things out here with rival Auburn here on November 30th in the Iron Bowl. Again, a very classic game last year between these two teams. Hopefully we get to see another classic this year at Bryant-Denny Stadium. So that's the schedule for 2024 for Alabama. I mean, looking at this schedule, it's a pretty tough one for a first-year head coach in Kalen DeBoer. You got Wisconsin on the road. You got Georgia on the schedule. You got Tennessee on the road, LSU on the road, and then Oklahoma on the road. Then you got some kind of trap games here with Missouri and Auburn. So I think this schedule is pretty tough for Alabama in 2024. But again, it wouldn't really shock me if Alabama did go like 8-4, and maybe 9-3 perhaps. But I still think this Alabama team can be like a 10-win team, something like that as well. So let's now get to the projection here for Alabama in 2024. Again, this is not my official prediction. This is simply a projection based on how tough the schedule is. And here is the scale I'll be using here for these projections. If it's a 1% game in the red, these are games where Alabama will have no chance in. 20% games in the orange, these are games where Alabama will be about a couple touchdowns of underdogs. 40% games in the yellow, these are games where Alabama will be about a heavy underdog in, about a touchdown of an underdog. I don't think you're going to see any of those percentages on here, though, for Alabama in the 1%, 20%, and 40% category, because Alabama will be favored in almost every single one of their games. 50-50 games will stay in the white, games that can go either way. 60% games in the purple, these are games where Alabama will be favored by at least a touchdown. 80% games in the blue, these are games where Alabama will be favored by a couple touchdowns. And then 99% games here in the green, these are games where Alabama will be favored by more than 3 touchdowns. And that's the percentage that we're going to start here with my projection for Alabama. Let's start with the easy wins here for Alabama in the green. And I think you got 4 of them on this schedule for the Crimson Tide. You got Western Kentucky, South Florida, Vanderbilt on the road, and then Mercer here. So I think these 4 games, Alabama will be favored by at least by more than 3 touchdowns. That Vanderbilt game, I know it's on the road. It's an SEC opponent, but I think Alabama clearly is the more talented team than Vanderbilt. And you know, Vanderbilt's a program that's just not been really good in these last few years in the SEC, so I think Alabama will probably roll in that game. I think that game you can at least put it at 90%, but the rest of the games here, your cupcake games, I think you can put those at 95%. I know South Florida was a really close game last year, but I think Alabama, like I said, they will be ready for that game this year in 2024 and kind of get revenge on South Florida after the game was pretty close last year. So I think those are the 4 games where Alabama will be favored by more than 3 touchdowns. Then we go to the games now where Alabama will be favored by a couple touchdowns in the blue at 80%. And I just got one game here on the schedule in the blue, and that's South Carolina here at home on October 12th. South Carolina is a team that, you know, is a program that's not been kind of, you know, heading in the right direction as of right now. Shane Beamer, I know he's done a pretty good job for this program, but last year wasn't really a good season. And based off of where they were last year, Alabama was a much better team than South Carolina. I don't really see South Carolina actually really competing in this game, but like I said, anything can happen once you get into the month of October. Some teams, you know, still, you know, get to, you know, some teams get better by that time and everything. So Alabama, I think, will be about a couple touchdowns of favorites here against South Carolina. All right, how about the games now in the purple? The games where Alabama will be favored by at least a touchdown at 60%. And I think you got 3 of them on this schedule: Wisconsin on the road, Missouri at home, and then Auburn at home. Wisconsin on the road, you know, based off of where Wisconsin was last year and Alabama going to the playoff, you know, Alabama is kind of the more talented team here, but playing on the road will be especially tough, you know, on the road at Wisconsin, but I think Alabama will be a slight favorite by a touchdown, so that's the reason why I'm picking it as a purple game for right now. Missouri and Auburn, these are 2 games at home. Like I mentioned, I think these are trap games here for Alabama, but playing at home, I think that gives them confidence here to be about a touchdown to favorite. Auburn was very close to being a 50-50 game. If both of these games were on the road for Alabama, I would definitely put it in that 50-50 category, just because Missouri and Auburn are 2 programs that seem to be heading in the right direction with both their head coaches. For Missouri, it's Eli Drinkwitz, and then, of course, for Auburn, it's Hugh Freeze. And Auburn actually was very competitive against Alabama last year. So those are two games in the purple that you don't want to sleep on if you're an Alabama fan. And then I don't have any underdog games like I mentioned earlier. You're not going to see any of those underdog games for Alabama on here. But the rest of the four games that you're seeing here in the white are pretty much 50-50 games. Georgia at home, Tennessee on the road, LSU on the road, and then Oklahoma here on the road as well. I think all four of these games are 50-50 games that can go either way. Georgia, obviously, you get that game at home at least, but you have to play Tennessee on the road, LSU on the road, and then obviously Oklahoma on the road as well. These are very tough places to play, especially, when Oklahoma's coming in as a newcomer in the SEC. To be honest, I do see them winning like 2 out of those 4 games, though. Let's say they split those, 4 games. Let's say they win 2 out of the 4 games here. Let's say they beat Georgia and Tennessee both here. And let's say they beat Georgia at home, Tennessee on the road. But then they lose to LSU and Oklahoma. That's how you can split those games apart. But let's say if they lose to Georgia and Tennessee, and then they beat LSU and Oklahoma. We'll get to the projected record now here for this Alabama team. So again, you kind of compare these games. You count the green games as wins, and then you count the blue games as wins as well here for Alabama. The purple games, you kind of split those as well. And then, of course, the 50-50 games, you split those. And like I said, I think they're going to win 2 out of those 4 games in the 50-50 category. So that means the overall projected record here for this Alabama team comes out to be 10-2 for 2024 for Alabama. So I think, like I said, they split those 50-50 games there. They win 2 out of the 4 games here in the 50-50 games. Like I said, let's say they beat Georgia at home, Tennessee on the road, and then lose to LSU and Oklahoma. That would give you a 10-2 record. And then the same thing, let's say they lose to Georgia and Tennessee, and then they beat LSU and Oklahoma. That would just, kind of split those games apart, and that would give you a projected record based on this schedule at 10-2. So I know Alabama's going to have a first-year head coach. I wouldn't really be shocked if they won just like 8 or 9 games this year, but still, just based off of where this team was last season, this team, their projection comes out to be 10-2 in 2024. So again, a new era for this Alabama team, especially with a new head coach and everything with Kalen DeBoer. I think he's a pretty good coach for this Alabama job. We'll see what happens, but this is my projection here for 2024 for Alabama. Give me your thoughts down in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned here for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports channel.